As we're rolling, well, there we go. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. As Amy introduced earlier, I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Adam Bramlage, and I am the founder of Flow State Micro. We are a functional mushroom company and a microdosing and psychedelics educational platform. We're here today to talk about microdosing, start low and go slow. So before we dive into some of the really important questions that you guys sent to us through email, we're going to start with just some basics. I'm going to go over some basics for microdosing for you and just make sure that everybody's on the same page before we get into the questions. So first of all, what is a microdose? A microdose is 1/10 to 1/20th of a normal dose of a substance. It could be any substance. We are talking specifically about psychedelic substances. So a microdose is 1/10 to 1/20th the normal dose of a psychedelic. There are no classic psychedelic effects to microdosing. It is very different, and we'll get into all of that later. Secondly, what are the most commonly used substances for microdosing? Well, I would say about 99% of the people that I work with are using LSD and psilocybin. And I would say probably that Jim Fadiman would agree that he's hearing from most people also talking about LSD and psilocybin. So today we're going to be discussing mainly those two substances when we're talking about microdosing. So I'm actually going to ask Jim this question because I think he's got a great description. Jim, could you explain the difference between a microdose and a macrodose to everybody real quick?
Yeah, one's really little and one's very big. Do you want more detail? Okay.
Just a little.
Okay. A high dose or a macrodose, which is a term that only has come into use because of microdosing. A high dose is something which will disrupt your structure either a little or a lot or completely. And it's in terms of numbers, if we're talking LSD, it's 200 to 400. If we're talking psilocybin mushrooms, it's 5 grams and up, and so forth. It's a totally different set of experiences. It's taken differently, it's handled differently. And in some sense, if you think of it as like the AM and the FM dial, they're all radio, but there's a world of difference. And we're going to stick to microdosing, which is less well known and less understood, even though it looks like it's becoming more popular.
Excellent. So to be clear, there are no classic psychedelic effects to microdosing. That is macrodosing and something that will be talked about in different webinars. Lastly, protocols. The most popular protocols, meaning how often you take a microdose, are the Fadiman and the Stamets protocol. The Fadiman protocol is named after this gentleman right here, Dr. Jim Fadiman, PhD, who developed the protocol, which is 1 day on, 2 days off, meaning you would microdose on the first day. On the second day, you would still be getting benefits from the microdose. And then on the second day off, you have a return to baseline. Then on that fourth day, you would dose again. I would say that is probably the most popular protocol in the world currently. Second most popular protocol is the Stamets protocol, named after Paul Stamets, which is either 4 days on, 3 days off, or 5 days on, 2 days off. And according to Jim, Paul said that allows for a little bit of flexibility within your own life and your own schedule. Lastly, stacking. What is this idea of stacking? Paul Stamets kind of made it popular, but it does have long roots, even back to the Aztecs and even Africa, combining psilocybin and honey. Stacking is taking a small amount of psilocybin in a microdose and combining it with other functional mushrooms or potentially other herbs. So that is the idea of stacking, and we'll dive a little bit more into stacking today, but then also in the digital workshop that's available January 14th. So we're going to move on now to Jim. We've got some fabulous questions from Jim. We collected these from you guys.
Okay.
Really great questions. So first of all, Jim, we got a doozy for you. Number one, is it safe to use psychedelics along with other medications? Specifically, anticonvulsants, antidepressants, beta blockers for mood disorder, or medicines for migraines. And if you're just joining us, please make sure your microphone is muted, right? Make sure your microphone is muted. So Jim, can you talk about, is it safe to use psychedelics along with other medications?
The answer is probably. what we've done, and what you'll be hearing from me is I do very little.
So Jim got muted. Hold on a second, Jim. You got muted by the host.
You should be unmuted now.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
You're good
You
to
are.
go. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Whatever I said, I didn't say that, and the host caught me before I did, whatever it was.
Is it safe to use psychedelics along
It
with
is.
other medications?
I had a list from my work and from the work of the Netherlands, the Microdosing Institute in the Netherlands. It's about 180 substances, pharmaceuticals, supplements, you name it. And these are all things that people have said, I was able to microdose successfully while using this substance. Now, let's look at the reason for the question. One reason is, am I going to get in trouble if I'm using one of these substances as a pharmaceutical while I'm microdosing? The answer is, so far, no, probably with the exception of lithium carbonate. Lithium is used in, it's a fairly dangerous drug on its own. It's used for severe mental illness, and we don't recommend microdosing if you're on it. Antidepressants we know a lot about, because a lot of people microdose in order to get off antidepressants. So they are microdosing while they get off the antidepressant, and the reports are very favorable. Some of the other substances, basically let's look at go back a step. Microdosing doesn't do much, but it does it very well. What it does is it improves the capacity of your system to go back into equilibrium. The reason you take a pharmaceutical of any sort is because there's some disequilibrium and the pharmaceutical targets it. If you improve the whole system, it's a very different system. So the answer in general is it's safe. However, if you're concerned, if you're using a coach, that's straightforward, you ask. If you're not, at the moment, the best list can be found on the Microdosing Institute of the Netherlands, who have taken the list that we developed, which was 180 items, and added to it as they have more people. It's a very safe substance. That's about all I can say.
Yeah, and so somebody's saying, so it's unsafe with lithium. I've also heard you say, or I've heard other people say, that people with lithium have microdosed and had positive benefits. So I think the long and short of it is we really don't know, and there are no trials that combine them. So you have to be really careful. The
answer is very simple. Some things people have said, it didn't work for me, I don't recommend it. Others have said, well, I was able to use it just fine. That for us is not safe enough, because we have no idea why some people weren't disturbed by it and some people were. So when in doubt, leave it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Anything about microdosing for ADHD?
Well, fortunately, and I rarely say this, there is a wonderful piece of research that just got done. And you'll see, it's kind of fun. They took 200 people who were diagnosed ADHD. 100 of them were on medications, 100 of them were not. All of them microdosed over the period of a month. All of them improved their capacity to function normally. What was fun about it is the people on medication, basically it took them longer before they started to show improvement. The people who were not on medication showed improvement very quickly. So at the moment, we would say that ADHD is a perfect possibility for microdosing, which is, it's better than the medication, and all the medication does is slow you down, but you still get the same level of improvement. So you don't have to stop your medications if you like them, and you don't have to keep them if you don't. So that's a good question.
Yeah, and isn't there a story about Albert Hoffman? Didn't he quote or say sometime that he felt like microdosing of LSD could have replaced Ritalin and potentially Adderall?
When he was, Albert Hoffman microdosed or took slightly more At least we know the last 10 or 15 years of his life. He lived to 102. What he would use it for, as he said, it's very good if you want to think and walk in the woods. So he was not using it. He didn't have a protocol. He wasn't looking at particular conditions, but he said he was disappointed that his company, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, didn't research this low end. He said if they had done that, there would never have been a market for Ritalin. Now, what he's saying is, remember, we just talked about antidepressants. Let's go to the other side. What are they called? Psychostimulants or cognitive enhancers. Same situation. People who want to get off those drugs, and they have one side effect which we need to be clear about. Adderall and all the other amphetamines are addictive. Getting off of an addiction is very difficult. Microdosing helps you, and as a number of people have written me, they said, you know, microdosing is kind of like Adderall without the crash, which means they're using it as a cognitive enhancer and it works fine. Now, again, people are using it as antidepressant and it looks fine. And that's why we're looking at the whole system, because there are no pharmaceuticals that you can either use as a cognitive enhancer or an antidepressant. They're all tightly focused. That's a different business model than natural healing.
Well, that takes us right into the next question. Can microdosing help with dependencies to things like tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, pharmaceuticals? Now,
I've got to start this, but all my sentences always begin with, my reports have said that people who use, this is an early finding, which is people were simply taking microdosing. A lot of them were college students. A lot of them were young people. They were not taking them for any particular defect or illness or condition. They were taking them for enhanced wellness, enhanced functioning, improved cognition. And what we asked them to do is kind of note every day a few items of how their moods were and how they felt. At the end of the month, to look back and do a report. And we began to get report after report after report that said, you know, I hadn't intended this at all, but I noticed that I'm smoking less pot, I'm drinking less coffee, and I'm having less liquor. Now, I looked at that and you think, well, what's going on? And what's going on is, think about it. When you want any of those, what you're saying is, I need to change my mental state. The one I'm in isn't good enough right now. I want to be more relaxed. I want to drink. I want to be stoned and kind of groove with people. Coffee is a necessity. And it turns out that when you're microdosing, people tend to do less of all of those. So that's in general. For people who are using it to excess, again, a lot of reports say it helps. It doesn't take you away from the work. If you're drinking too much, microdosing will help. Going to AA meetings will help. Getting some support from your support world will help. So microdosing is not a cure-all and it's not a magic pill, but it's an incredible support tool.
Yeah, and I would just like to second that emotion. A lot of people that I coach and work with are using microdosing to help, lessen their dependency to a lot of these substances. And when working with things like pharmaceuticals and tapering, it's really important that you're educated on it and that you work with somebody who has experience, an integration specialist, a coach. Your doctor needs to know what's going on. So there's a lot of different things going on, but we have seen in the citizen science realm a lot of positive reports in my specific work for helping with dependencies. Jim, can you speak to psychedelic?
Let me go back a second, because there's an important word in what Adam said. The word is tapering, where there's a feeling of, oh, I'm going to take a psychedelic, or I'm going to take microdosing, I can stop taking my whatever it is. No. If you read the 8-point type that you got, that little folded thing you got from the pharmacy, one of it says, don't miss a dose, or you're going to be in serious trouble. That's kind of addiction, by the way, but that's the way it is. If you simply stop a pharmaceutical and start microdosing, you're going to be in serious trouble. The word is tapering, which is a fancy word for withdrawal, and it's slow, and you have to therefore make sure that whoever is giving you a prescription knows that you are tapering and you've used the term with them so they can help you taper. You may or may not, depending on your situation, add that you're microdosing. More and more you can do that. But it still takes a long time to get rid of particularly an antidepressant and an antipsychotic. It can take some months, but it's easier. It's more doable with microdosing. So,
Awesome. Thank you for clearing that up. Yeah, and with a lot of people that I've worked with antidepressants, when he says a long time, it can take 6 months, 7 months, even longer sometimes to slowly taper down milligram by milligram those doses. So thank you, Jim. Jim, can you speak to psychedelics for the aging population? Let's reframe that. Can you speak to microdosing for the aging population, especially maybe for something like dementia, Alzheimer's, or even Parkinson's to mitigate symptoms?
well, let's representing for a moment the aging generation, and I certainly have joined that group. The reports are you function better. Your sleep can improve. Your physical capacity to do exercise can improve. The phrase is, gee, I noticed I was doing one more set of reps at the gym. So that's for what we would call normal aging, which is you continue to age, but in a healthier way. If we're looking at the problem conditions of aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc., then we'll look at Parkinson's in a different way. The data is unclear and positive. So we're getting some reports, and we've gotten some wonderful miracle stories of, there's one story of a gentleman who was in a home, an aged home, and hadn't spoken for a month. Had actually a couple of words like, "Are you there?" or "Is it tomorrow?" Something like that, just one phrase. And when microdosed, he started to not only use more words and begin to converse, and I saw a video of this, but he actually told a story from his childhood and then laughed in a totally normal way. Did it last? We don't think so. Was it proof that in spite of the extraordinary cognitive decline you see in these conditions, is there a lot of cognition left inside? The answer seems to be yes. So it's one of the areas we're looking at, and there are a couple of the companies now of the, you'll excuse the expression, 400 psychedelic oriented companies. Several of them are looking at those conditions and looking at microdosing.
Yeah, Jim was referencing somebody that I was working with, a 92-year-old, and the only thing that stopped his improvement was COVID and the inability for his family to see him and continue to help him with the microdosing as he was in a home. But one of my favorite clients is my 75-year-old mother, and she was a nursing home emergency room nurse, and she said it's been just life-changing for her crippling anxiety and her quality of life. Paul Stamets is somebody who also talks about we as humans have a neurodegenerative condition over time, and that mushrooms, especially psilocybin and even lion's mane, is something that can help to create neurogenesis and improve neuroplasticity. So hopefully a lot of research coming up in the future into the aging populations and psychedelics in small and large doses. Jim, can you speak to microdosing for teens with depression, ADHD, or anxiety?
Oh my. See, here's the nice part of not being a physician, not being part of an institution, is I can say what we know, which is a lot of teens say it's been helpful. Do I ever recommend that any teen take anything? No. Do I ever recommend that a small child take anything? No. Does that mean that small children and teens shouldn't use these things? No. But it's a very individual decision. Let me give you an example. I was talking with someone at some length and about many other things, a charming artist, and he indicated that he had a 5-year-old with severe autism, and that he wanted to know if microdosing was appropriate. And I did what I just did with you. I said, basically, I can't say that it's a good idea, and I can't stop you. So since I couldn't stop him, I think he was in Connecticut, the next thing I heard was, I did it. I decided what was the correct dose, and I did it, and I wrote back and said, what happened? He said during the time he was microdosing, he used many more words. He was much more social, and he stopped hitting his head so often. Okay. Now, I think he stopped at that point, but that's the kind of, see, those are the kind of stories which attract researchers. So it looks like there's some good reason to try these things on teenagers and younger people. And the way the culture is set up, that's a fairly taboo area. But it isn't taboo to citizen scientists, of which you all are members. And it isn't taboo in other cultures. There's a wonderful bunch of research on children in the ayahuasca churches in South America. You're given ayahuasca at a very, very young age in those churches, and they basically did a very simple thing, which is, how are those kids doing in the same village with the kids who are not part of the ayahuasca church? And the ayahuasca kids were healthier and more athletic and smarter and less trouble and so forth. So it's not surprising. And again, in indigenous people, it's obvious. If something makes your system work better, is there an age in which you don't want that to happen?
That's great. Thank you. And there's so much information, and there's so much about these questions that we want to be able to dive into that we obviously won't be able to dive into in 60 minutes. So obviously, good opportunity to join us for the digital stream on January 14th, where we will be able to dive a lot deeper into a lot of these topics. Jim, somebody was saying that they've microdosed for years, and was wondering if you recommended adjusting the dose as we age. Do you ever hear of people needing to adjust dosages?
Well, I know that they adjust alcohol dosages. And it's the wrong question. The question is, when should you adjust the dose? And I was just reading some of the work coming out of an incredibly interesting group in Peru. They're training coaches in 10 countries at the moment for microdosing. And they say every time you're about to take, think about, is this the right dose for what you're doing it for? So that it's a little bit more like food. When you sit down to eat, you adjust the dose of food depending on when was the last time you ate, how hungry, how good is the food, all kinds of variables. Within the range that microdosing works, the goal is to use as little as necessary, as little as possible, just because that's prudent and sensible. There are times when you feel you need more, and that's appropriate time. We don't really have any particular notion that getting older is a reason to change a dose. Feeling that you might want to change a dose, the nice thing is the next time you microdose, you change the dose, and you're the judge. See, one of the things I've said to people is, here's the Fadiman protocol, and here's a range of how much is a reasonable dose. At the end of a month, you decide what's correct for you, because you know more about your body than I do. And certainly at the end of a month of microdosing, you have more evidence and more experience than I do. So the idea of asking me what you should do next, in a sense, is kind of taking away your own capacity, your own responsibility for your own health. So the answer is, yes, you should adjust your dose correctly when it's appropriate to do so.
And is this might be something that a coach would be helpful for, somebody like myself, or
See, that's the wonderful thing about
digital stream from Esalen, is there's a lot of information here, because again, what somebody might not know is, every flush of mushrooms you grow is different in potency. So you might have mushrooms from 3 years ago that worked differently than the ones you're using now. So it's important that you're educated, on how to properly microdose LSD, which is very complicated and can be very strong and can very easily, especially in liquid or paper form, turn from a small dose into a very large dose. So again, education is really important. Every mushroom on the planet has a different potency, even ones that have grown next to each other. So you really have to make sure that you test your mushrooms, you have a journal, what variety it is, you have a little scale that you're weighing it out on. Jim, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just pointing out that all of what you're saying is things that didn't happen when we were first exploring, because we didn't quite know what we were finding. And what we're finding is a big surprise, that if you take it seriously, and you take it with someone who knows more than you do, and you get support for what you're intending to do, surprise, that works better than throwing down a pill and going to the office. So
Absolutely.
this is surprisingly like most other parts of your life. If it matters, then it matters to do it well. Let me give you an example. This is a friend of mine. He was a student of mine like 40 years ago. And he said he would like to get off of antidepressants. And so he went to his physician. It took 6 months because he had to get off one antidepressant and then another and then another. And at the end of 6 months, he said, for the first time in 31 years, I'm not on an antidepressant. Now, his life changed a lot. Mainly, he said, I got all my emotions back. And I didn't know quite how to do them because I hadn't had them for 30 years. We're looking at guidance when it's important, right? Nobody amputates their own arm. You get an expert. And nobody should, if you're going to take seriously your own health and your own well-being, I think I'm quoting Adam here, is there's an explosion of coaches. It's like a new occupational category, and it will probably be one in the Federal Registry in a couple of years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Next question. For those seeking a career in psychedelics, is a master's or higher needed to progress in the field? Do you think I can contribute with a bachelor's or less?
Well, until they manage to turn it into a licensed occupation, good people will do it better than people who are not as good. In the work I did in the 60s, we were a small foundation authorized by the federal government to use psychedelics for clinical uses. Our two best therapists, who were the people working most intensely with people at high doses, were both software engineers. Their software engineering background did not prevent them from being incredibly sensitive, aware, compassionate human beings whose capacity to both listen and sense what was not being said was highly developed. So I'm not thrilled with professionalization. I haven't found that the wisest physicians I know went to the better medical schools, particularly. They may have, they may not. Psychics, shamans, there's a whole set of other occupations which fall outside the occupational world. So to this person who says, can I do it with a bachelor's? The answer is, if you can't do it with a bachelor's, getting a degree isn't going to make you better. And there are good training programs, but the people who tend to go to the good training programs are people who want to have a profession because they're already good at it. Very few people say, well, I've never used psychedelics. I think I'll get a master's in counseling psychedelics. It just doesn't happen. These are people with a lot of personal experience and a lot of empathy. So that because these programs are so popular, by the way, they can pick and choose who they're going to take for training. So go for it.
Okay, awesome. Jim, do you need somebody with you the first time you take a microdose?
No.
No. Should you be educated beforehand on the dosage, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. You have to, this isn't, I'm going to close my eyes and reach into the mushroom barrel, and whatever comes out, I'll stuff in my mouth. You wouldn't do that even at an ice cream parlor, where it's already been prepackaged and it's pretty safe. It's better to have somebody who knows more than you do. That's all. It's not terrible if you don't, and it's often fine if you don't, because microdoses are basically, how do you know you've taken too much? It's a question that wasn't asked, but you should ask it. How do you know you've taken too much? You say, well, I was microdosing and I really started to feel, just that wonderful feeling where you're just starting to come on, and it didn't go more than that. That's too much. Okay, that's how you know it's too much. If it feels like you're about to get into the bottom edge of a psychedelic experience, that's too much. Microdoses are below the level of changing reality. you don't get visions, you don't get angels saying you're very special. You also don't get anacondas that eat you up, as happens in ayahuasca. What you do get is, and it's a very, very good title, it's a really good day. There's a book by that title on how microdosing shifted a lot of things in a person's life. And it didn't affect the outside world did notice. People said, gee, you're really happy these days and you've been depressed. How anything you're doing? But he didn't say, wow, I noticed that you just stopped and were in a long dialogue with that tree. They don't do that because that's not what microdosing is about.
Okay, that leads us into a really great question from the chat, and I'm going to try and get to as many in the chat as I can. So keep putting your questions in there. Jim, what about microdosing for healthy normals or people that aren't depressed or on medications or happy people? I mean, there probably are some happy people out there. What are the reports you've heard about healthy normals in microdosing?
Probably most of the people who microdose are what we would call healthy normals. And there's a whole rumor that it started in Silicon Valley and that people in the tech industry microdose on a heavy daily basis. And the answer is more of them do, not in Silicon Valley particularly, but across the planet. Our first research group, where we simply said to people, write us, we'll tell you the basic safety methods for using microdosing, and in return, you'll tell us what happened. And we had reports from 51 countries. Most of those were without coaches and without support because we didn't have coaches when we started. So this is, see, we have a funny thing. I don't know if all countries do this, but there's almost nothing out of the Food and Drug Administration about wellness. It's not a category because it's not a defect, an illness, a weakness, a predisposition, a genetic disorder. It's, you know, if I'm, well, we have a lot of professional athletes now who microdose. That's what I would call healthy, normal. And why do they microdose? Because they are able to function better. One of my favorites is a lovely guy in the martial arts. And he was asked by a newspaper reporter, is there any difference now that you said you're microdosing these strange substances? He said, yeah, the difference is I used to get silver medals, now I get gold medals. So that's what healthy wellness is about. And now remember, almost all the research you've been reading the past 5 years about macrodoses is medical. That's not what psychedelics have been used for historically, and even in the 60s. And I was listening to Roland Griffiths, who really started what we call the psychedelic renaissance. And he said, we need to have, and I love this term, we need to have much more non-therapeutic research, okay? And that's what we're talking about. And most microdosing, probably 60, 70% of microdosing is non-therapeutic. It's just beneficial. Does that answer that?
Really well. Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you. So we always get this question, Jim. Please discuss the potential heart health implications when microdosing over long periods of time.
It's a funny question because it also, here's another question, is how many people who've microdosed have developed a unicorn horn in the center of their forehead? And the answer is, we don't have any cases yet. So we really can't say that it won't lead to having a unicorn horn. We have no cases of heart condition. We do have other substances taken often at thousands of times higher doses that cause heart conditions and that excite one of the same neurons in the brain. So it's a kind of analogy question, which is if this over here, and when you take a whole lot of it daily and it has a heart condition, will that be the same as taking this tiny amount over never every day and over, again, a long period of time? And the answer is, so far, we have no evidence. So it's very hard to say whether it's, and we will never have the evidence because no one's going to do a 20-year study, 100,000 people who microdose and 100,000 people who don't. And 20 years later, we'll see, what their mortality is. We do know from high dose research that people who have used psychedelics, this is federal government stuff now, at least once in their life, are healthier in terms of major physical difficulties than the matched population. This is out of the census kind of studies. We're dealing a couple 100,000 people in each group. People who have psychedelics seem to be healthier, not enormously so, but enough so that statistically it was obvious.
Yeah, and if I can talk for a minute, you mentioned that microdosing didn't start in Silicon Valley, and something that we talk in great length about in the digital stream on January 14th is the history of microdosing. And we have a long ancestral history of microdosing. It's been used for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And the tribes currently that are still microdosing, like the Raramari of Mexico, they've been doing this since pre-Columbian times. They don't have heart issues. You're not hearing from these indigenous First Peoples communities that have been doing it for tens of thousands of years that the heart issues come up. Usually that heart issue is around a study, right? That had to do with large doses, Jim?
But not of psychedelics.
Something completely different, right? But it gets lumped into psychedelics and microdosing.
And the overlap is it affects the same neuron. Now there's a little, if again, reading the literature, I'm getting more and more cynical. So I don't want you to pick up that cynicism other than when I tell you. But the idea that a psychedelic, and those of you, it's very rare that any of you listening have not had a high dose. It's very unlikely that it only affected one set of neurons and only in your brain. That's just speculatively unlikely. Now, just to make it clear, you have more of those neurons in your gut than you have in your brain in the first place. So we're at a very primitive stage in what we know about how high doses work. And we're at a we're not even at a primitive stage with microdosing. We're only, but we're basing it on again, hundreds of thousands of years of work with people who were very careful about what they took. If you're living in a plant-based world, you pretty soon know from childhood when someone says, don't eat one of those when it's ripe. And don't let the goats eat it. To the stuff that says, hey, we're having a party tonight. We're around the barn fire and we're going to do rituals and we're going to bring the gods in. And we recommend that you eat some of this, which is what we do when we go on these long all-night parties. Now, by the way, what I'm saying is raves were not created. Raves are a rediscovery of a much older system. So there's a lot going on that we don't know about, but there's a way of talking when you're doing science as if you know more than you do.
Jim, have you heard anything about highly sensitive people, HSP, and microdosing?
I assume they should take less. That would be my guess. I think there's another term from another substance called being a cheap date. That means you're highly sensitive to alcohol. Something else just went through my mind, but it was a similar notion, which is, if you are diagnosed as high functioning autistic, which means you're really smart and your social skills seem to not be very well developed, and that's because you're not able to pick up certain cues. It turns out that if people with autism microdose, nothing happens. But if they up the dose maybe 4 or 5 times what you and I would take, they have the exact same experiences that you and I have. So some people, some groups need to take more, and whatever highly sensitive people are, whatever that means, they should start with less. Now, remember, when I say less, we're already talking about very small amounts. Let's take mushrooms. The starting dose is often 1/10 of a gram. Remember, a gram is 454 grams in a pound, so it's not much. Well, there are people who take 1/10 of 1 gram, of 1/10 of a gram. They take 100th of a gram, and they indicate that's just fine. And I observed their conversation one night on Reddit, and they were all so happy to find each other because they thought they were just strange people, but they were highly sensitive to the effects of microdosing. Again, you have to, the only person who can correctly determine your dose is you. A starting dose, that's why we say start low and go slow. There's a tendency to say, well, whoa, if such, if 0.2 of a gram is great, 0.4 of a gram must be better. And the answer is, that's not the way it works. And one of the reasons we're having a whole weekend on this is because some of this is very personal. And the way you are is not the way anyone else is. And a little bit of group discussion changes the way you approach your own body.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to handle this next one. Has there been any study looking at epigenetic reprogramming after extended periods of microdosing to see if neural pathways can be converted to a more favorable signaling format, and then microdosing can be stopped given the level of reprogramming? Or do you need to continue microdosing long-term to maintain benefits? So first of all, there's not very many studies right now on microdosing, but there is an amazing first of its kind take-home EEG study going on right now with Dr. Connor Murray, PhD from UCLA, who will be at the Esalen workshop, also presenting on January 14th. He'll be presenting on his microdosing and LSD study, which is really fascinating with what it found out about placebo effects. He was testing placebo, LSD 13 micrograms, and LSD 26 micrograms. Connor is doing a study right now with wireless EEGs, where you're able to get a wireless EEG sent to you. And for the course of a month, while you microdose, all of that data is sent back to Connor and then later analyzed. And if you're interested in that study, you can reach him at connor@synautics.com, PSYNAUTICS.com. Not too much on studies, Jim. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I was so glad that you took that question with all those $5 words in it. The answer is that people who've used microdosing for a long time we don't have a lot of information. We do have a lot of information that people say, I took it for a given amount of time and then I stopped. And we have other people that say, I took it for a given amount of time, I stopped, and then something else happened in my life and I used it again for a while. So it's a tool. It's not a religious object. And as a tool, you are the tool user and you're the one who decides. I'm thinking there was a person who had a serious stroke. The kind of stroke where in the emergency room, they debated should they let him die. That's pretty serious, but they didn't. And I came in part of their lives, this couple, 10 years later. 10 years later, this is now Northern California, so he'd had a huge amount of alternative therapies, and he was functional. He was functional. He no longer could do what he'd done for his career, which was classical guitar, but he was walking, he was talking, he was having a sociable life, but he wasn't going out, and he didn't have much social life. But he started microdosing, and his friends and his physician noted a shift in his capacity to be in the world. And then later on, he said to his wife, hey, I'd like to go visit friends in Mexico. Now, he'd been like his own little pandemic. He hadn't been out in years. And she said, well, that'd be great, but it's going to be a couple of weeks till I'm free from my work. And he said, well, I'll just go. I got a call from her. Can he microdose while he's traveling? I said, it looks like he better. So he goes to Mexico and he calls back, and they're checking in. And a few weeks later, and there's some nice things in between, but a few weeks later, he calls and he says, I think you'll like this. I'm no longer using my cane. That's what is possible with microdosing. Again, that's the question of age. This was someone in his 70s. It's a serious condition, a stroke. This is taking microdosing in like a couple of months. That's what keeps people like me and Adam in this, which is the implications for all of us are far greater than you'll have a really good day. But having a really good day turns out to be a fairly important starting point.
We're at 10 minutes, folks. Just hopping in to let you know that we're at the 10-minute mark here.
All right, guys, I'm putting Connor's email in the chat, connor@synautics.com. You can email him. Right now, we've got over 250 people on the waiting list. So go ahead and get signed up and we'll get you more information on how you can join the first ever take-home wireless EEG study. Again, Connor will be there for the weekend and for the digital stream. So let's see.
Let me just throw in something that I don't think is in the questions, but one of the things that we're looking at, and we talked about it with stacking. Now, stacking is almost always with other mushrooms. Now, Paul Stamets also has niacin, but there's a whole nother world where one combines herbs with microdoses. Now, there's nothing published, but because the herbs come from Chinese medicine, and it's a way of working with herbs and microdoses that, according to the people who have tried it, they prefer it to any other way. Now, we have the person who's been developing it at the Esalen weekend. And again, this is not for publication, but it's the kind of breakthroughs. See, we're at the stage where we're doing breakthroughs. We're finding discoveries that blow us away. I was on, hidden secret ways that you can't find, called Instagram. And there's a little note that says, we've just been working with people with chronic, horrible pain. And what we've been doing for them is giving them a high dose and then microdosing. And it describes how effective the high dose was during the day and how effective the microdoses were, less effective than the high dose, but you can function afterwards. These are chronic, serious, terribly overdrugged pain patients. That's discovery. That's what we're looking at. And I assure you, by January, I'm going to have a whole nother bunch of these miracle stories that I get to share.
Well, Jim, can you tell us about Rachael? Rachael is going to be presenting January 14th, and isn't she doing a whole talk on herbs and stacking in Chinese medicine?
Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
Okay.
That's one of the things we just can't do everything in an hour, and you have to, since most of us know zilch about how to combine herbs, other than a little bit of cooking. It's not something we can toss into an hour-long program. So, but Rachael will be there, and we'll be with herbs, and we will get our first lesson in basic herbs.
Awesome. So a couple of things you'll get on the digital stream. I'll be teaching about the history and the ancestral use. Jim and I will be teaching about best practices, where we dive into dosages, substances, even the more rare substances. Rachel's going to be teaching about herbs and stacking. And then Connor Murray, PhD, is not only going to be talking about his new wireless take-home study, but this recent study he did with Harriet DeWitt at the University of Chicago. And you can already find information on Connor's current, or I should say recent, LSD microdosing study by just Google searching microdosing study National Geographic. National Geographic picked it up, bunch of articles on this first of its kind amazing study. Jim, here's a great question for you. Having never been able to legally dabble in any of this, 24 years military retired, concerned about my career, how do I get involved in the trials and studies? I'm tired of us being fed opiates and ibuprofen to fix everything. Do you know how they can get involved?
Well, I get it all the time, which is, I'm happy to join your study. Not that I have one, but they're happy to join, and I'm happy that they're happy. We live in a country which, for reasons quite unknown to any of us, and it has nothing, psychedelics were made illegal, not for any medical, psychological, physiological, or psychiatric reasons. They were made illegal for political reasons by President Nixon. That's the way, and it's not undocumented. So we live in a country which, for reasons that I just gave you, has made it illegal for many substances that have thousands of years of use for healing, health, and wellness to not be available. I can't change that right now, but as you noticed, Colorado said, why don't we make it not only legal to take it under licensed support, safe settings, but also that anyone can grow it at home and give it to their friends. That's a very radical shift from this, because it's a little strange, you can't, it's illegal. So we're making now a cultural shift. So I would say to this person, one is, you'd be surprised how many people in the military have chanced their careers. And two, things are changing. Oregon is changing, Colorado is changing. The world is moving on because the fact that it helps people get better from so many different conditions can't be ignored. It can be questioned. And we didn't ask the other question that we often get that drives me nuts, not the heart question. The other one, well, isn't this all just placebo? And the answer, since I'm talking to all of you, no. Does expectation help? Yes. Does it help in everything else you've ever done that you wanted to do? Yes. Psychedelics are not immune from the normal mind-body capacity. Will it work? Will it help you more if you think it'll help you more? That's what the evidence is for everything else, and psychedelics seem to be no different. So, throwing that in as a giveaway.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just another reminder, if you didn't see it in the chat, the digital stream for January 14th is going to be on sale at the early bird $99 ticket for 2 more days. So in 48 hours, it will go up to $199. So if you get a chance, click the link, sign up, and join us today. We've got so much to talk about. Jim, can you tell us Rachel's last name again?
Henrichsen.
Henrichsen. So Rachael Henrichsen will be there doing a whole talk on stacking herbs, Chinese medicine. Connor Murray, PhD, Jim and myself. Jim, are there anything that you think we're forgetting or anything else you want to add?
Well, I have to say that if some of you are thinking, well, this is so interesting, I'm going to just go to Esalen and, spend a lot more and get the whole thing. And the answer is, it sold out in 3 days. Now, Adam and I disagreed on this. He said it would sell out in 2 days, and I thought that was nuts. But it turns out, and you're really part of it. You're one of several thousand people who are listening, because it's important to do something that's good for you, and it's important to do it right. And we're doing it. We're making it available every which way we can. So I'm just very grateful that you came on. I'm also grateful that all these little matchbook size faces on my screen were people that pushed to the front of the line and are here on the live chat. And those of you who are not on the live chat, and there's a lot of you, this is what we're talking about. This is why we're talking about it. And it is criminal not to give people every possible opportunity to improve their health safely and effectively.
And I just want to add one more thing we forgot to mention. Do you microdose forever or do you have to always do this? And what I'd like to say is what's unique about microdosing is the longer I work with people as a coach and they begin to microdose, over time, they're microdosing less and less and less. And we also suggest that if you're microdosing and you're tapering something, or you're going to be doing it for an extended period of time, that after a month or two, you're taking time off. So there are so many different little intricacies that are important to, making sure that your experience is successful. Jim, is there like a standard amount of time you think maybe people should give it a try before they give up?
Well, yeah. Well, what we know is there are two reasons people give up. One is they had no experience, no awareness whatsoever. What's the point? Probably raise your dose. The other is they've had concerns, they've had a stomach ache, they got a headache, the flowers turned and smiled at them. That's too high a dose. We've learned that most of the people who complain, simply the diagnostic cure is half the dose. Remember, I talked about the people that not only take not 1/10 of a gram, they take 100th of a gram. There's a whole nother group of people that don't take 7 to 12 micrograms. They take 1 microgram. That's 1/1,000,000th of a gram, and it leads to changes. So we're not at the place where we can say, here's the rules, and if you step outside these rules, you're bad. We're saying, here's the area in which we're learning, and we're aiming for greater safety and greater efficacy for more conditions. That's really our charter. Your charter is to take the best possible care of yourself you can with what you got from this, and hopefully Probably most of you knew a lot of this, but for each one of you, there were parts of it that were new and hopefully made you feel a little easier with how you're doing it or how you should change it. So, and by the way, one of the little matchbooks, I don't know if you're seeing it, but there's a lovely person who's a mushroom who has been attending this, and whoever you are, we are your friend. We eat you, but we're your friends.
We eat you in large and small doses, and plants and animals are derived from mushrooms. So it's not surprising to me that microdosing has for people. So the secret is making it safe and effective for people. And again, that's the importance of learning how to do it, learning the protocols, learning the dosages, learning that, after a month, maybe you should take a break, being connected to coaches like myself, educators like Jim, people like Connor and Rachel. So we really hope that you'll join us on January 14th for the digital stream. The sign up is in the link over there. You can still get a hold of that. Jim, before we go, we've got 1 minute. Have you been to Esalen before? You've been there, right?
You're asking me? Yeah, I led a seminar there 60 years ago. The first seminar that Esalen ever had anybody attend, and it was on psychedelics. So, it's like I've been reborn in the same body and doing the same stuff. So I'll see some of you there. If not, in the future, I'm sure. We're not done with Esalen and microdosing quite yet.
Beautiful, thank you. So one last reminder, we've got 48 hours to grab your ticket at $99. We really hope that you're going to join us on the digital stream. For those of you whose questions we didn't get to, I'm really sorry we couldn't get to it. You can get a hold of me, Adam, at flowstatemicro.com if you've got any further questions. Jim, you want to say anything before we go?
I'm just so happy to see what we're doing. Remember, I lived through the whole illegal period, the kind of 40 years in the desert period, and to be invited to talk about how people can make their lives better without being afraid of being busted. As my wife has said, my wife Dorothy of 60 years has said, it's wonderful that you've lived long enough to kind of see it turn over and go in the direction that you always intended. So thank you all for making my life richer by coming to this hour. And I know it's if it's too new age for you, just close your eyes. But I love you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. We're so glad to have you. It's 6 o'clock on the dot here on Pacific time, so we're going to let you go. So thank you so much for being a part of this tonight. We really hope you'll join us for that digital stream on January 14th. The link's in the chat. We're going to leave it there for a few minutes. Take care. Thank you. Amy, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. The link to sign up for more in our January digital event is in the chat. Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay well.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Hope
you.
to see you soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.